Why does a CFO sitting here in Chicago or a chief operating officer running logistics in Houston, why does it matter?
Yeah, because this isn't about geopolitics, is it? It's about actually running profitable and resilient business operations. And if your operations depend on diesel trucks, gas-fired boilers, or grid power that is being generated still largely by fossil fuels, we're betting on an energy future and a system that is fundamentally unstable. And that is not a place where we want to be as business leaders.
And if you're electrifying your fleet, we talked about EVs. If you're installing solar and battery energy storage, we talked about renewables, or you're switching to heat pumps, you're suddenly playing a different game. And especially so if we're talking about that solar and battery energy storage being on site. We talked about kind of broadly, but when you do it on site, you lock in your energy costs, you reduce exposures to commodity volatility, you cut emissions and improve your sustainability scores, and you build resilient, inflation-proof energy system.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. I'm Gareth Evans, and this week we're tackling something that should have every business leader leaning forward in their seat.
I'm Dan, and Gareth, I think you nailed it when you said this is a boardroom level issue. We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz and what happens when nearly 20% of the world's oil and LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, passes through a geopolitical pressure cooker. On a
Yeah,
personal note, Gareth, I know you just returned. How was your trip?
yeah, I had a really nice holiday. It was good to get away with the family. Ethan finished elementary school, and so has some time off. It was good to kind of celebrate, get away, have some downtime, and check out some Central American jungle and sea time. And as I was just saying to you, it's nice to kind of get back and to kick off the routine. I'm gonna do a 3 day fast to get the body realigned and the brain dialed back in, and should be good to go. How about you?
Love it. Well, as you know, I've been in Chicago last week and this week visiting family, which has been tremendous. And then last weekend, in between these 2 weeks, we traveled out to Connecticut to a friend's wedding, which was absolutely beautiful. We caught Connecticut, like Western Connecticut, in the kind of rural area at a very nice time. But somehow between the flights and being at a big wedding, I caught some sort of bug and have been dealing with a bit of a pretty sore throat, but the show must go on. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, I love it. And if there's any coughing or spluttering, we'll take it. Um, but yeah, crazy times, Dan. I think there's a lot in the press right now, and obviously we're seeing impacts of the frictions in the Middle East reverberating around the world. But let's break it down. So the Strait of Hormuz, it's just 21 miles wide, and that seems to be the central focal point for much of the concern right now. Because, as you alluded to in the introduction, it moves about 20 to 30% of global seaborne oil and 20% of global LNG, and that's $1 billion a day in oil shipments. And the threat between Iran, Israel, and now the US get involved, is making that flow look less secure. And we'll see. I think there's talks of a ceasefire right now, but I think this is just the beginning of some elongated conflicts and supply chain disruptions, and it's important for us to be very aware.
Certainly, and we're recording this here on June 24th. So as we get further along, things will develop, I'm sure. But like you said, I don't see it going away anytime soon. I mean, the tensions are super high. Tankers are turning around. They're stopping outside of the strait in order to not get stuck. The freight rates in the region have spiked over 150%, and war risk insurance is climbing. And we're seeing the GPS and tracking of these ships just jamming up. So even the threat of disruption is enough to rattle global markets.
Yeah, and it's not just a Middle East issue, is it, Dan? It's this is a global business risk. A disruption in the strait means higher fuel prices for everyone, which leads to returns of inflationary pressures. And then, as we've talked about in past episodes, like fuel is in the supply chain of absolutely everything. That leads to then these ripple effects that impact our transportation, our manufacturing, our distribution of water, of everything. It leads to the rise in prices of running our businesses and the goods that we all buy as individuals. And in 52 countries, fossil fuel imports account for more than half of their primary energy use. So this is obviously super important. And I think people will be surprised to hear that economies representing 20% of their global GDP, including Germany, Japan, and Italy, import over 2/3 of their total energy demand as fossil fuels. So, like, this impacts some major countries. And the decline of the Pax America, you know, combination that's really fueled us for many years is rising regional conflicts, and it's increasing these contested maritime routes, which is then intensifying with these tariff wars, and it's placing the whole global trade system under greater pressure and some of the biggest threats since World War II.
And it's a classical domino effect. You don't just get expensive fuel, you get delayed shipments, price of your goods, rising interest rates, all the things that you touched on. And so, if we're mostly talking about oil and LNG coming out of the Middle East, and we learned in episode 89 with Kingsmill Bond from Ember that the US is an energy exporter, how's this actually going to impact electricity prices in the US? And the short answer is natural gas price spike. And so, really, how are oil and natural gas prices linked? I'll just go through a couple pieces here. First, the historical linkage. So until the 2000s, natural gas prices were often indexed to oil prices, especially internationally. And so both were used for heating and industrial fuel, as well as the generation of electricity. And in the US, the link has weakened over time due to the shale gas boom, which has really given rise to US being an energy exporter and
Yep.
the low cost of domestic gas. But then, as well as in different supply chains. So oil is global. Natural gas, especially in the US, is much more regional unless it's liquefied, which is the LNG component of it. So the modern price correlation is still in times of crises or geopolitical tension, like what we're experiencing right now, the prices of oil and natural gas tend to rise together. So investors hedge across the different commodities. There's a shared demand for power generation, heating, and industry can create substitution effects, and higher oil prices raise transportation and extraction costs across the energy sector. And so, what we've seen is as global supply fears, LNG prices surge, especially in Asia and Europe, and US natural gas prices rise because of exporters in the US anticipate stronger overseas demand. They'll start diverting domestic supply. So it's not that they're looking out for the US because they're producing here in the US. If the price goes up, they're going to take advantage of the opportunity. And then the global LNG prices really start to increase and reflect the oil market volatility. So when oil prices rise, international buyers bid up LNG, leading to US producers to export more, tighten domestic supply, driving up the prices. And so, lastly, the correlation metrics. So, over the last decade, when we look at correlation between oil and US gas prices, there's a weak to moderate correlation, about zero 0.2 to zero 0.5 in stable times, but a very strong correlation above zero 0.7 during market shocks and global crises. And so at the end of the day, this really means that geopolitical risk increases correlation. LNG market growth tightens the global linkage between oil and natural gas. US gas abundance weakens the link domestically, but as we see prices go up, the substitution and the US producers are going to jump on that train and drive it up, which is therefore going to drive up electricity prices because so much of our centralized grid is produced from natural gas fired power plants.
Yeah. And this is now a core vulnerability for businesses, isn't it? Especially as we're passive consumers of energy from that grid system and being locked into these commodity based energy, supply and demand risks. And so then that leads to these supply chain shocks, the inflation, and the roll down pressure onto businesses.
So what are we to do, Gareth? Luckily, we just connected with Kingsmill a couple weeks ago from Ember, and
Yep.
that couldn't have been better timing. So, as they laid out in their electrotech strategy, a pathway for nations and businesses to move from a dependence on kind of foreign energy, whether that be foreign to the U.S. or foreign to their business, there are pathways.
Yeah, and I really like the simplicity of it. It was super powerful, but it really aligns with, I think, what we firmly believe in, Dan. Generates energy locally, whether that be wind, solar, storing it with batteries, electrify your end users, particularly transportation and heating, and then reduce import exposure and inflation risk with durable, long life assets versus these commodity based solutions.
And Emmer's analysis shows us that just with these three technologies, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and renewables, we can reduce fossil fuel imports by 70%. And that's $1.3 trillion of savings annually for importing countries.
Yeah, I love it. That's a, it's a huge number.
Staggering.
And I think that's 70% just for EVs, heat pumps, and renewables. I think that is far more significant than I think most people would realize. And fossil fuels require that continuous import, whereas electrotech, and I really like that term, electrotech, you import the equipment once, or you produce it within your own country, which is the debate right now. But let's say we continue to rely on the Chinese supply chain. We import solar panels, batteries once, but now we've got that equipment powering us for the next 20 to 30 years. It's a one-time investment versus that lifetime exposure of having to buy gas and or the electricity generated by gas or oil on a continuous basis.
And we keep talking about importing. Again, if US is a net exporter, how does that impact us? Well, if these geopolitical and others around the world are importing and therefore prices go up, that's what we're going to see here impacting us in the US. So, I mean, the fossil fuels are really like renting forever. Especially
Yeah,
let's put it in the context of the business. If you're receiving power from the centralized grid, you're essentially renting power forever. And the landlord is going to keep rising rents. That's the nature of the utility business model. So the electrotech is like owning your own property or your own home. Once you've installed it, you're largely insulated from inflation and shocks, especially if you have a stabilized interest rate, which oftentimes you can finance these systems, whether that be through traditional debt or a power purchase agreement or energy as a service agreement. At the very least, you may have a 0% escalator, great, or you'd have a known escalator of 1, 2, 3%. And so you've got that price certainty.
yeah, I love it. And I think traditionally people have tried to hedge on gas prices and things like that. But today you can literally hedge and lock in your electricity prices. And so when these global energy crises hit, and they're going to continue to come in these waves, we continue to run our operations by generating and store energy right where we need it. And so while the economy might wobble around us, our facilities can keep powering through and do it at a cost rate that we can plan out for years and decades to come.
Yeah. So let's bring this home, Gareth, for the business leaders that are listening. Why does a CFO sitting here in Chicago or a chief operating officer running logistics in Houston, why does it matter?
Yeah, because this isn't about geopolitics, is it? It's about actually running profitable and resilient business operations. And if your operations depend on diesel trucks, gas fired boilers, or grid power that is being generated still largely by fossil fuels, we're betting on an energy future and a system that is fundamentally unstable. And that is not a place where we want to be as business leaders.
And if you're electrifying your fleet, we talked about EVs. If you're installing solar and battery energy storage, we talked about renewals, or you're switching to heat pumps, you're suddenly playing a different game. And especially so if we're talking about that solar and battery energy storage being on site. We talked about kind of broadly, but when you do it on site, you lock in your energy costs, you reduce exposures to commodity volatility, you cut emissions and improve your sustainability scores, and you build resilient inflation proof energy system. And this was particularly compounded for me. I just had coffee this morning with an energy leader within a Fortune 500 company who told me he just received notices from several of the utilities across the Eastern Seaboard regarding the spot price increasing due to this heat wave that's hitting the eastern U.S. As high as one of the utilities noted to him that peak rates could go as high as $2.75 per kilowatt hour. $2.75. That is staggering. Whereas that 4 a.m. price, where demand is very low, could be as low as 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's where it's important for these business leaders to think about how do you, again, I'll come back to it, take it into your own hands and not just rely on others, but produce one of the few inputs to your business right there at your own property.
Yeah. And what we love about it, Dan, is it's fast to do, versus relying on major infrastructure upgrades. We can get these systems built designed, planned, built, operating, and delivering all of these great benefits in months to definitely under a year, and at a far lower upfront cost than trying to invest in massive gas turbines and fossil generating assets.
And I mean, it's across the U.S. There's so many places where there's a strong business case to do this, that it's not a matter of scarcity and not being able to do it. It's really a matter of strategy, and it's a matter of mobilizing all the folks within a business that are going to have say in this, whether that be operations, finance, procurement, building engineering, strategy, in order to get everybody aligned around deploying these systems at scale.
Yeah, and what's crazy to me, Dan, is we've spent literally decades diversifying fossil supply chains, investing in naval security, we're building strategic reserves. But the smartest move is literally to electrify and localize. And this is genuinely how we future proof our economies and businesses versus constantly trying to, you know, tape over these cracks that keep appearing.
And it's the kind of politicization of this as being a climate solution rather than really a business and national security strategy that has driven a bit of the slowness in really adopting this. But I think business leaders are starting to wake up and see the opportunity at hand, especially with the rising electricity prices that we've seen over the past couple of years, and we're only going to see that continue to be exacerbated by events like what we're seeing here in the Middle East. So, what should business leaders do with this insight, Gareth?
Yeah, I think first of all, what's your exposure? What are your energy costs today? How are they going up or down across your business operations? Where can you have the greatest impact from in terms of both electrifying your assets as well as then generating and storing energy at them? And then really building that roadmap to electrification and local generation. And we know right now there's a lot of noise in the market around incentives. We've covered that a lot on the past few episodes. There are amazing incentives that exist today. Capture them, take advantage of them, but they are not the only driver to doing this. As we've talked about, the volatility in this market is more is big enough of a reason to go and do this without the incentives. So don't wait for it. Stay calm, drive your business in a very proactive way, get less reactionary to this volatility, and ensure that you can ride through these storms with control over your own operations.
And bring your leaders into the mix. Bring finance, bring operations, bring procurement leaders into the mix. It's going to require a group to make these investment decisions, whether that's investing your own capital or signing long-term agreements for energy as a service. But it's really about risk management, profit protection, and strategic advantage. And while companies typically are thinking quarter to quarter, the companies that are going to continue to lead in the coming decades are ones that really start to take matters into their own hands when it comes to energy.
Yeah, and I think let's get real, Dan. The companies that are going to get hit the hardest are those that are going to wait. They're going to get hit by rising and volatile prices. They're going to have power outages and power quality issues. They're going to be impacted by regulations. And the smart ones, they're already doing it. They're already doing it at scale. And so everyone else needs to start playing catch up. They need to, start electrifying, bringing in heat pumps, electrifying their fleets, installing solar and batteries and wind, and ensuring that they are really locking in this long-term value early and often.
Yep. Well, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, the Strait of Hormuz is definitely a warning shot, isn't it? It's shown us how fragile and outdated our current energy model is, and we've talked about this many times. But it also points to there's such a great opportunity for the businesses that want to get after it. We don't want to have to rely on oil tankers and conflict zones. We've spoken about this with my own past experiences in Iraq. We shouldn't be reliant on energy coming from very remote, conflict heavy areas of the planet that we do not have control over. We can build our own systems locally that are clean, that are resilient, that are reliable, and businesses who want to make the shift now, won't regret it for sure.
Yeah, and I think the other big thing is that the energy future really doesn't have to depend on geopolitics. The so much of our businesses are going to be impacted by global politics that the availability and cost of your energy supply doesn't have to be one of them.
Yeah. So it's been a good episode, Dan. Thanks for riding with us, everyone. It's crazy times out there. Stay focused, stay proactive, and really get after it. Especially this is a very dynamic environment. So share this with your network, and particularly your operations and finance teams who are going to be dealing with this most.
And certainly, this electrotech revolution just isn't about emissions and sustainability. It's rather about taking control of your own business.
Yeah, I love it. Appreciate it, Dan.
See ya.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.